The late morning sun beat down on Mark's meticulously manicured backyard, promising another perfect summer day. He'd planned to spend it by the shimmering azure of his pool, perhaps finally tackling that loose tile near the deep end. Instead, a metallic glint, crude and utterly out of place, caught his eye as he stepped onto the patio with his first cup of coffee. It was a silver Mercedes-Benz GLE, massive and unyielding, parked with such audacious disregard that it completely obstructed the narrow, wrought-iron gate leading to the side alley. That gate wasn't just a convenient shortcut. It was the only service access to his pool equipment, the emergency exit, and, more importantly, the path he used to take his elderly golden retriever, Rusty, for his morning walk without trekking through the entire house. A slow burn began in Mark's chest. He knew this car. It belonged to Karen, the new neighbor who'd moved in 3 houses down a month ago, bringing with her an air of entitlement that preceded her arrival. Her previous transgressions, loud late-night parties, letting her designer poodle defecate on his lawn without cleaning it up, a passive-aggressive note about his rose bushes encroaching her airspace, were minor irritations. This, however, was a blockade. He walked over, the grass cool beneath his bare feet, the scent of jasmine momentarily failing to soothe his rising temper. The SUV was parked so close, its polished bumper kissed the gate, making it impossible to open even a crack. There wasn't a note, no apology scrawled on a napkin, just the silent, imposing arrogance of her vehicle. "Are you kidding me?" Mark muttered, his voice a low growl. He pulled out his phone, already dreading the confrontation. He didn't have her number. He didn't want it. He'd tried to be cordial, to extend a neighborly welcome, but Karen had dismissed him with a wave of a perfectly manicured hand and a saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes. He tried knocking on her door. No answer. He tried again, harder. Still nothing. His knuckles ached. He paced back to his pool gate, the sun now beating relentlessly, matching the heat in his skull. Rusty, sensing his owner's agitation, whined softly from the patio. Mark tried to squeeze through the gap between the SUV and the fence, scraping his arm on the rough brick. It was no use. The minutes stretched into an hour. The pool tile would have to wait. Rusty's walk was delayed. Mark's Saturday, once bright with possibility, was slowly being corroded by a simmering frustration. He tried calling the non-emergency police line, but the operator, after a long, weary pause, informed him it was a civil matter, a parking dispute. "Perhaps a tow truck?" she suggested, her voice devoid of helpfulness. A tow truck. Mark considered it. But that would take hours, a whole production. And Karen would undoubtedly make it his problem, escalating the drama he so desperately wanted to avoid. He just wanted his gate clear. He just wanted to enjoy his weekend. Then, the true urgency hit him. His elderly mother, recovering from a minor surgery, was due to arrive in 2 hours. She relied on the accessible side entrance through the pool gate, which led directly to the ramp he'd installed. The main entrance had steps, a perilous obstacle for her in her current state. Panic began to intertwine with his anger. He called, his mother, trying to keep his voice calm. "Mom, honey, there might be a slight delay. A neighbor's car is blocking the side gate." "Oh, dear," she said, her voice already tinged with worry. "Is everything all right? Should I just wait?" "At the station? No. Don't worry," Mark assured her, though his heart hammered. "I'll figure it out, I promise. Just give me a little more time. I'll call you back." He hung up, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Karen wasn't just inconveniencing him. Now, she was actively, carelessly putting his mother in a difficult position. This wasn't just about a pool gate anymore. It was about basic human decency, about respect, about crossing a line that could have real painful consequences for someone he loved. He stormed back to the SUV, his mind racing. He looked at the gate, then at the massive vehicle. He walked around it, noting the slight, almost imperceptible downward slope of his driveway leading to the pool area. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. He noticed Karen had left the car in neutral, a habit, perhaps, or another act of casual negligence. The parking brake, he confirmed, was not engaged. Her windows were slightly ajar, a faint, sickly sweet perfume wafting out. The keys were probably in her purse, abandoned somewhere in her McMansion. A dangerous thought, insidious and compelling, began to bloom in the dark corners of his mind. It was a thought fueled by frustration, by the escalating urgency for his mother, by the sheer, unadulterated disrespect of it all. He imagined Karen's smug face, her dismissive wave. He pictured his mother struggling with the steps. And then, he looked at the glimmering expanse of his pool, deep and inviting. He leaned against the SUV, his hands pressed against the cool metal. He wasn't thinking rationally. He was thinking justice. He was thinking consequence. He was thinking about how Karen needed to understand that her actions affected other people. And he was thinking about that tiny, barely visible incline. With a surge of adrenaline, he crouched down, his muscles tensing. He wasn't a strong man, but the car was in neutral. He pushed. At first, it barely budged. He gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and pushed again, harder, imagining his mother's frail figure, Karen's uncaring smirk. The enormous SUV, with an almost imperceptible groan, began to roll. Inch by agonizing inch, it moved, the tires barely whispering on the concrete. The gate, still blocked, was pushed inwards, groaning under the immense weight, until the SUV cleared its path entirely. Mark gasped, sweat stinging his eyes. He stopped, chest heaving, adrenaline coursing. The gate was free, but the SUV was still, moving, slowly picking up momentum on the gentle slope towards the pool. A cold dread, mixed with a shocking flicker of dark satisfaction, washed over him. He knew he should stop it. He knew he should grab the bumper, wedge something under the tires. But a part of him, a deeply wronged, utterly fed-up part, just watched. The silver Mercedes-Benz GLE, a symbol of Karen's thoughtless arrogance, picked up speed. It rolled past the now open gate, past the edge of the patio, and with a sickening, grinding lurch, its front tires dipped over the lip of the pool. A moment of suspended animation. Then the entire front end plunged into the deep end, sending a tidal wave of chlorinated water cascading over the patio, soaking Mark and drenching the entire side of his house. The sickening crunch of metal, the gurgling of water, the high-pitched shriek of Rusty from the patio. It was a symphony of chaos. The back wheels spun uselessly in the air for a second, then followed, the SUV tilting dramatically, its tail end still protruding precariously from the deep end, while the front was completely submerged. Bubbles erupted from under the water, and the faint scent of gasoline began to mix with the chlorine. Mark stood there, dripping wet, his breath catching in his throat, staring at the impossible sight before him. The glistening surface of his pool now hosted a very expensive, very wet German luxury vehicle. Mark stared, jaw slack, at the spectacle in his backyard. The silver Mercedes, half submerged, looked like a monstrous beached whale, its tail fins still defiantly raised, catching the sun. Water dripped from his hair, down his face, and pooled around his bare feet. Rusty, the golden retriever, had retreated to the safety of the shaded patio, offering a series of bewildered barks. The faint smell of gasoline was becoming stronger, mingling with the chlorine, an acrid perfume of self-inflicted disaster. "Oh my God," Mark whispered, the words catching in his throat. It had happened so fast. The adrenaline which had propelled him to push the car now turned into a cold, churning wave of dread. What had he done? He hadn't meant for it to go into the pool. Had he? A tiny, vindictive part of him, a part he didn't like to acknowledge, had watched it happen with a grim satisfaction. But the rational Mark, the homeowner, the responsible citizen, was now screaming. This was a nightmare. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling, and stared at the screen. Who did he call first? The police? A tow truck? His mother, to tell. Her to definitely not come now? He could already hear Karen's voice, shrill with outrage, accusing him of everything. Before he could decide, a piercing shriek ripped through the quiet suburban air. "My car! What have you done to my car?" Mark whipped his head around. Karen stood at the edge of his property, having evidently returned and bypassed the now unblocked, but still damaged, gate. Her eyes, wide and horrified, were fixed on the floating vehicle. Her perfectly coiffed hair was slightly disheveled, and her expensive leisure wear seemed to wilt under the weight of her fury. She looked less like a casual neighbor and more like a harpy descending from Olympus, albeit one clutching an oversized designer handbag. "Karen," Mark began, trying to inject some calm into his voice, though his heart was hammering. "You parked your car directly across my gate. I couldn't get through. My mother is due any minute." "I parked it for 5 minutes," she screeched, advancing towards him, her voice escalating with each step. 5 minutes. What is wrong with you? Are you insane? You pushed it in. I saw you, you lunatic. Mark blinked. "You saw me? You were watching? I was pulling into my driveway. I just needed to grab my sunglasses," she wailed, gesturing wildly towards her own house, 3 doors down. "I saw you standing there, then you shoved it. You ruined my brand new GLE. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Her eyes blazing with an unholy fire fixed on him. "You are going to pay for this, Mark. Every single penny. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. You're going to jail." The absurdity of the situation almost made Mark laugh, a hysterical, bubbling sound that he quickly swallowed. "Karen, you left your car in neutral without the parking brake, blocking my only access point. There's a slight incline here. I simply pushed it enough to get it off my gate so my mother could get in. It started rolling, and I couldn't stop it." He knew it sounded weak, flimsy, even to his own ears. The truth was far more complex, tainted by a fleeting moment of vengeful satisfaction. "Don't you dare lie to me." Her face was a mask of furious disbelief, blotchy red in the summer heat. She stormed past him, skirts swishing, and peered into the murky water at her beloved vehicle. "Oh, the leather, the electronics. It's totaled. You did this on purpose, you common brute." The insult, delivered with such venom, struck a nerve. "Common brute? Karen, you treat this entire neighborhood like your personal dumping ground. Your dog, your trash, now your 2-ton metal monstrosity blocking my property. I tried to reach you for over an hour. I knocked. I called the non-emergency line." "My phone was on silent. I was having a meditation session," she retorted, as if that explained everything. "And I'm allowed to park where I want on the street." "That's not the street, Karen. That's my property line, and it's a shared access alley," Mark yelled back, his composure finally snapping. Rusty, sensing the escalating conflict, let out a nervous bark, retreated further under a rose bush. "I'm calling the police." "Right now!" Karen declared, her perfectly manicured finger already stabbing at her phone screen. "This is vandalism! Attempted murder of my car! I'll have you arrested!" Mark watched her, a strange calm settling over him amidst the chaos. He was wet, his Saturday was ruined, his mother was still waiting, and his backyard was now a crime scene. But seeing Karen, utterly unhinged, standing there with her drowned SUV, a small, dark part of him couldn't help but feel a prickle of something close to vindication. This was a consequence she couldn't dismiss with a wave of her hand or a passive-aggressive note. Minutes later, a patrol car pulled up to the curb, its blue and red lights flashing silently. 2 officers, a tall, stoic man named Officer Davies, and a younger, more sympathetic-looking woman, Officer Chen, emerged. Karen immediately launched into a theatrical account, pointing accusingly at Mark and then dramatically at her submerged car. Officer Davies listened patiently, his gaze occasionally, flickering to Mark, who stood silently, arms crossed, water still dripping from his shirt. When Karen finally paused for breath, red-faced and panting, Officer Davies turned to Mark. "Sir, your side of the story?" Mark explained everything, calmly and methodically. The blocked gate, the urgency of his mother's arrival, the hours. He spent trying to reach Karen, the car being in neutral with no parking brake. He omitted the fleeting moment of deliberate inaction, framing it as an accidental, unstoppable roll. Officer Chen walked to the edge of the pool, peering down at the submerged vehicle. She took notes, her expression unreadable. Officer Davies, meanwhile, was talking to Karen, who was now demanding Mark's immediate arrest. "Ma'am," Officer Davies said, his voice flat, "leaving your vehicle in neutral on an incline, without the parking brake, blocking an access point, constitutes negligence on your part. Mr. Thompson attempted to move your car off his property after repeated attempts to contact you. While the outcome is unfortunate, his intent was to clear the obstruction. Your initial actions created the hazardous situation." Karen gasped, her jaw dropping. "Negligence? My car's at the bottom of his pool. He pushed it." "We will investigate, ma'am," Officer Davies continued, unruffled. "But as it stands, we have a civil dispute over property and parking exacerbated by your negligence, and a potential environmental hazard from the vehicle in the pool. For now, we need to arrange for the recovery of your vehicle. That will be at your expense, as it was parked on private property without permission, and your negligence contributed to the incident." Karen stared at him, then at Mark, then back at her drowned luxury car. The color drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly pale. The righteous fury that had propelled her a moment ago seemed to evaporate, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a colossal, expensive public humiliation. And it was all on her. The afternoon descended into an unprecedented spectacle. Word of the submerged Mercedes spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, faster than any social media post. Neighbors, drawn by the silent flashing lights of the patrol car and the growing hum of curious onlookers, gathered at their fences, phones raised, capturing every moment of Karen's public humiliation. Her face, a study in mortification and simmering rage, twitched as she fielded a barrage of questions from Officer Davies, her voice now a strained, almost hysterical whisper. Mark, by contrast, felt a strange sense of calm. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a weary resignation. He'd done his duty by his mother, and now the consequences, though chaotic, were unfolding with a certain inevitability. He had called his mother back, explaining the slight delay was actually a minor pool incident, and she should wait at a nearby coffee shop. He still needed to figure out how to get her home safely. Officer Davies, after concluding his initial assessment, directed Karen to contact a specialized towing service. "Not just any tow truck will do for this, ma'am," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You'll need a crane, potentially a dive team, and definitely a hazmat crew for the fuel leak." Karen's eyes widened to saucers. "A crane? A dive team? You're joking!" "No, ma'am. This is a significant incident," Officer Chen interjected, pointing to the sheen of gasoline now visibly spreading across the pool's surface. "The environmental impact alone is considerable. You'll be responsible for the cleanup, too." The reality of the situation, the sheer financial and logistical nightmare, seemed to finally penetrate Karen's indignant bubble. She retreated to the shade of a nearby oak tree, furiously dialing on her phone, her back to the gawking neighbors. Her usual air of untouchable privilege had completely evaporated, leaving behind a woman utterly out of her depth. Hours crawled by. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Mark's pool, once a sparkling oasis, was now a stagnant, oily pond, its blue tiles obscured by the massive, silver hulk. Finally, a procession of vehicles arrived. A colossal flatbed truck bearing a crane, a smaller utility truck with hazmat response emblazoned on its side, and another carrying a crew of burly men in matching uniforms. The recovery operation was slow, methodical, and painfully public. The hazmat team, moving with grim efficiency, deployed booms and absorbent pads around the submerged vehicle. They looked like astronauts, their protective gear adding to the surreal atmosphere. Karen watched from a distance, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering despite the lingering heat. The crane operator, a grizzled man with forearms like tree trunks, began the delicate process of attaching slings to the Mercedes. Mark watched, fascinated and horrified, as the heavy-duty straps were carefully maneuvered around the car's chassis. The pool water churned by the activity resembled a toxic stew. The smell of gasoline was potent now, making his eyes water. Rusty, his tail tucked, remained a safe distance away, occasionally emitting a low, worried whine. A small crowd had gathered on the street, drawn by the crane's towering arm and the unfolding drama. Whispers, muffled laughter, and the incessant click of camera phones filled the air. Mark overheard snippets. "Serves her right. Always thought she was a piece of work. Can you believe she parked there?" He felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and a perverse satisfaction. Then, with a shuddering groan of hydraulic machinery, the crane began to lift. Slowly, agonizingly, the submerged SUV began to emerge from the water. Water streamed off its roof, its windows, its once pristine body. It looked like a drowned beast, its interior ruined, its luxurious leather seats visibly soaked and sagging. The driver's side window, Mark noticed, was still slightly ajar, a final testament to Karen's absent-minded negligence. As the car cleared the water, it hung suspended in the air, a silver, dripping trophy of misjudgment. The entire neighborhood collectively held its breath. Then a ripple of murmurs, a few outright gasps, swept through the onlookers. The crane swung the car over to the flatbed truck, depositing it with a heavy thud. The sight of her car, completely destroyed, dripping sludge and reeking of fuel, finally broke Karen. She let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Officer Davies, with a sigh, handed her a citation for negligent parking, a bill for the hazmat cleanup, and a notice about impound fees for the vehicle. "You'll be contacted by the city regarding the environmental assessment of your pool, Mr. Thompson," he told Mark, his voice softer now. "We recommend you don't use it until it's been thoroughly cleaned." Mark nodded, his gaze fixed on Karen. She was no longer the imperious neighbor. She was just a woman, alone and devastated, facing the very real consequences of her actions. The vindication he'd felt earlier was now tinged with a hollow pity. It was a messy, expensive, and deeply public lesson, but it was a lesson nonetheless. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the wrecked vehicle, and the stunned silence that followed its extraction. The neighborhood, having witnessed the epic fall of a self-appointed queen, finally dispersed, leaving Mark, his ruined pool, and the very real cost of a Karen's casual disrespect. The evening after the great SUV retrieval was a blur of activity for Mark, far removed from the peaceful Saturday he'd envisioned. After the crane left, taking Karen's mangled Mercedes and her shattered dignity with it, two workers from the hazmat company remained, painstakingly cleaning the visible oil slick from his pool and the surrounding patio. The faint, nauseating scent of fuel still clung to the air, making his head throb. Rusty, bless his heart, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, sticking close to Mark's heels, occasionally nudging his hand with his wet snout. First, there was the urgent matter of his mother. He drove to the coffee shop where she'd been patiently waiting, her face etched with concern. He tried to downplay the incident, describing it as a freak accident involving a very minor fuel spill. Her sharp eyes, however, caught the lingering smell on his clothes and the weary slump of his shoulders. "Mark, dear," she said, her voice gentle but firm as he helped her into his car. "You look like you've been through a war, and you smell faintly of a gas station. What exactly happened?" He sighed, realizing there was no point in sugarcoating it. As he drove home, he recounted the entire saga, from Karen's initial transgression to the dramatic extraction, carefully editing out his moment of deliberate inaction, though he suspected his mother could read between the lines. He painted Karen as the villain, a role she had so easily slipped into. His mother listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to a quiet, knowing disapproval. "Some people," she mused, shaking her head. "Such disregard for others. You did what you had to do, Mark, though I wish it hadn't ended quite so spectacularly." A faint smile touched her lips, a shared understanding passing between them. Getting his mother settled was a relief. The ramp was now clear, and she navigated it with cautious ease, expressing her gratitude for his foresight. He made her tea, the mundane ritual a soothing balm after the day's chaos. As she rested, Mark returned to the backyard, the hazmat. "Team still working under floodlights." "We've got the surface skimmed, Mr. Thompson," one of the crew chiefs explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "But there's going to be a full chemical analysis of the water. We'll need to drain and deep clean the entire pool and probably run some soil tests around the edges. This could take a few days, maybe more, depending on contamination levels." Mark nodded, the words barely registering. His mind was already calculating the time, the cost, the endless inconvenience. His oasis was ruined, at least for the foreseeable future. He thought about Karen, now presumably at home, stewing in her own misery. Would she truly pay for all of this? The police officer had seemed confident, but Mark had seen enough of life to know that justice wasn't always swift or absolute. The next morning, the neighborhood was still buzzing. The silent, almost reverent awe of the previous night had given way to an excited chatter. People waved to Mark as he walked Rusty, offering words of solidarity and thinly veiled schadenfreude regarding Karen. "Saw what happened, Mark," old Mr. Henderson from across the street called out, a twinkle in his eye. "Quite a sight. Needed to happen, frankly. She's been a menace. Mrs. Rodriguez, 2 houses down, brought over a plate of homemade cookies. For your troubles, Mark, and a thank you from all of us. Someone needed to show her." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Heard her husband is furious. Left for a business trip first thing this morning, apparently." The subtle shift in the neighborhood's dynamic was palpable. Before, Karen had been an irritating force, largely tolerated due to her aggressive self-confidence. Now she was a pariah, a living cautionary tale. The incident had, inadvertently, forged a quiet camaraderie among the other residents, a shared sense of victory against a common, albeit annoying, foe. Later that afternoon, a sleek, dark sedan pulled up to Mark's curb. A man in a sharp suit, carrying a briefcase, stepped out. He introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, an independent insurance adjuster representing Karen's insurance company. He was polite, professional, and entirely devoid of the emotional baggage of the previous day. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've had quite the incident here," Thorne said, his gaze sweeping over the partially drained, still-smelling pool. "I'm here to assess the damage and hopefully facilitate a resolution." Mark walked him through the events, trying to stick to the facts, to the version he'd given the police. Thorne listened intently, taking copious notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the incline, the duration of the obstruction, Mark's attempts to contact Karen. He examined the damaged pool gate, the chipped patio tiles, even sniffed the residual odor in the water. "So, to be clear," Thorne finally stated, clicking his pen closed, "Ms. Peterson's vehicle was parked negligently, blocking a critical access point. You attempted to move it, and due to her continued negligence of leaving it in neutral with no brake, it rolled into your pool. Is that correct? Mark hesitated. The internal battle was brief. He had to stick to his story. Yes, that's correct. Thorne nodded, his expression unreadable. Well, Mr. Thompson, my initial assessment, pending a full report and chemical analysis, suggests significant damage. Pool structure, filtration system, landscaping, and, of course, the environmental cleanup. Given Ms. Peterson's documented negligence and the police report corroborating your efforts to resolve the obstruction peacefully, I anticipate her policy will be primarily responsible for all damages to your property, as well as the cost of her vehicle's recovery and disposal. A wave of relief, potent and sweet, washed over Mark. It wasn't just a karmic victory. It was a financial one. One that meant he wouldn't be footing the bill for Karen's colossal mistake. Thorne then added, with a subtle smirk that lasted only a second, of course, her premiums are going to be astronomical, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's dropped entirely. A total loss like this, combined with environmental violations, is a black mark on anyone's record. Mark felt a chill of satisfaction. Karen would pay, not just with money, but with her carefully constructed facade of untouchable privilege. Her insurance, her reputation, her peace of mind, all would be thoroughly submerged, just like her SUV. As Thorne prepared to leave, he turned back, a slight frown on his face. One last thing, Mr. Thompson. I understand Ms. Peterson is quite litigious. Expect a lawsuit. She's already mentioned deliberate sabotage and emotional distress. It might get messy, but based on what I've seen, you have a very strong defense. The warning hung in the air, a dark cloud on the horizon. The battle wasn't over. It was merely moving from the backyard to the courtroom. The weeks that followed the Great Pool Incident, as the neighbors had affectionately dubbed it, were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and unexpected community dynamics. Just as Marcus Thorne, the insurance adjuster, had predicted, Karen's lawsuit arrived promptly. It was a thick, official-looking document, brimming with legal jargon about gross negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and property damage, ludicrously claiming Mark had deliberately sabotaged her vehicle. Mark armed. With Officer Davis's police report, Thorne's preliminary findings, and a newfound resolve, hired a local attorney recommended by a colleague, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had a reputation for being sharp, direct, and unfazed by entitled opponents. Her initial advice to Mark was simple. Stick to the facts, Mr. Thompson. Her case is built on hysteria. Ours is built on evidence. The legal proceedings began with a flurry of depositions and discovery. Karen's lawyers, a high-priced firm, from downtown, attempted to paint Mark as a volatile, vengeful neighbor. They brought up old minor disputes, the rose bushes, the dog incident, trying to establish a pattern of animosity. Mark, under Sarah's calm guidance, countered each accusation with a steady, unembellished account of the blocked gate, his urgent need to get his mother home, and Karen's consistent pattern of disregard. The key piece of evidence, besides, the police report, was a surprisingly clear surveillance video from old Mr. Henderson's house across the street. He'd installed a new security system that inadvertently captured the entire event. Karen parking her SUV, Mark's attempts to reach her, his struggle to push the vehicle, and its slow, inexorable roll into the pool. The video didn't show Mark deliberately propelling it, but rather a car in neutral, on a slight incline, slowly gaining momentum after being nudged. It was a damning piece of visual evidence, utterly contradicting Karen's claims of sabotage. Meanwhile, the recovery of Mark's pool was a slow, arduous process. The chemical analysis confirmed a significant fuel contamination, necessitating not just draining and scrubbing, but also a specialized treatment to neutralize the residual hydrocarbons. The pool liner needed to be replaced, the filtration system entirely overhauled, and even some of the surrounding soil had to be excavated and replaced. The costs, all meticulously documented by Thorne and now being forwarded directly to Karen's. Insurance were astronomical. Karen, however, was not giving up easily. Her initial humiliation had morphed into a bitter, unyielding rage. She refused to acknowledge her own culpability, instead fixating on Mark as the sole cause of her misfortune. She avoided eye contact with him in the street, sometimes even veering her new rental car onto the wrong side to avoid passing his house. Her once frequent neighborhood parties ceased entirely, and the elaborate decorations she usually put up for every minor holiday remained in boxes. Her husband, according to Mrs. Rodriguez, was still on an extended business trip, a euphemism everyone understood. The neighborhood, however, had clearly chosen sides. The incident had ripped the veneer off Karen's entitled facade, and the quiet resentment that had simmered beneath the surface now bubbled over into open disdain. When her lawyers tried to collect neighbor testimonies to support her character, they found a distinct lack of willing participants. In fact, several residents, including Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Rodriguez, volunteered to provide statements on Mark's behalf, painting a picture of Karen as an inconsiderate and problematic neighbor. During one particularly tense deposition, Mark found himself face-to-face with Karen for the first time since the day of the incident. She sat across the table, her face drawn and pale, but her eyes still held a spark of venom. Her lawyer, a slick man with an aggressive demeanor, grilled Mark on his intentions. "Mr. Thompson," Karen's lawyer pressed, "did you or did you not feel a sense of satisfaction watching Ms. Peterson's vehicle enter your pool?" Mark met his gaze, unflinching. "I felt a sense of dread, sir. My property was being damaged, and I knew the headache that was coming. I was also relieved that the obstruction to my gate was finally cleared, allowing my elderly mother safe access to my home." He paused, then added, "It was Ms. Peterson's negligence that put her vehicle in that position, and her continued absence that escalated the situation to that point." Karen flinched, her nails digging into her palms. Her lawyer objected, but the statement had been made. The truth, blunt and unsparing, hung in the air. As the weeks turned into months, the legal dance continued, but the momentum was clearly shifting. Sarah Jenkins systematically dismantled Karen's case piece by piece. The police report, the surveillance footage, the hazmat findings, and the consistent testimonies from the neighbors all painted a clear picture of Karen's negligence and Mark's reasonable, albeit unfortunate, reaction. Finally, a pre-trial mediation was scheduled. Mark, accompanied by Sarah, walked into the sterile conference room. Karen was already there, looking defeated, her lawyer beside her, his usual bluster noticeably diminished. The mediator, a stern, impartial judge, laid out the facts, emphasizing the overwhelming evidence against Karen. "Miss Peterson," the mediator stated, "the evidence strongly suggests your negligence was the primary cause of this incident. Your car, your responsibility. Mr. Thompson's actions, while resulting in significant damage, appear to have been a direct consequence of your initial actions. The court is likely to see it that way." Karen's face crumpled. She looked at her lawyer, who offered a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The fight was draining her, financially and emotionally. She was losing. The humiliation of the incident, once confined to her backyard, was now being dissected in a legal forum, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. After hours of intense negotiation, a settlement was finally reached. Karen's insurance would cover all damages to Mark's property, including the full cost of the pool repairs, the hazmat cleanup, and even a small sum for loss of use of his backyard amenities. In exchange, Mark agreed to drop his countersuit for nuisance and emotional distress. It wasn't the total victory he might have dreamed of, but it was a comprehensive financial recovery, and perhaps more importantly, an official acknowledgement of Karen's culpability. As Mark signed the documents, he glanced at Karen. She wouldn't meet his eyes. instead staring blankly at the table. She had started this battle with a roar, expecting to crush him under the weight of her privilege, but in the end, her own.